All right, let's get started for the final panel of this very busy 2 days. In her remarks yesterday, Ye Wenxin suggested that one way of looking at Taiwan was geographically. The papers on this panel actually fit very nicely into that mode of that historiographical approach that Ye Wenxin was talking about, because they're all about Taiwan's environmental. They're all about Taiwan's physical location. They're about geography and the relationship between geography and history. So in a sense, we have a very material panel to end on. We have 3 presenters and 3 respondents. Am I right in thinking that each respondent is assigned to a paper?
That's right.
That's right. Okay, good. Well, I think it actually went rather well the way we did it in the last panel, having panel respondent. So that hasn't been how we did it through most of the session, but I think that's what we will do today. The first half of the panel, we were talking yesterday about the Boston Bang, or the Boston Mafia. The first part of today's panel is continuing the Boston Mafia tradition, although as a scholar of lineage, I think it's better to think of it as the Boston extended family. Our first speaker, Liu Cui-rong, PhD, well, I'm sure known well to all of you, a PhD, Harvard, and I'm sorry, I forgot, it's your special research, distinguished research fellow? Yes. Distinguished research fellow at the Institute of Taiwan History, and of course a seminal figure in the creation of that institute at Academia Sinica. Professor Liu.
Although I'm not using PowerPoint, but I think I still will because everybody have papers, so I just will say briefly about my paper. I should apologize first because I was told to participate in this conference only in early January. So I do not have time to do original research. So I just put together all my works and to make this paper. And I would also say at this moment that when you are going to make the papers into a collection, my papers will not be included. Okay, environmental history as a field of study began to grow since the 1970s. There are 2 journals that have special issues on this topic. One is the Pacific Historical Review, and the other is the French journal Annales. And according to the American historian Donald Worcester, environmental history was launched in a time of worldwide cultural reassessment and reform, with the goal of deepening our understanding of how humans have been affected by their natural environment through time, and conversely, how they have affected the environment and with what results. For historians of Chinese history, environmental history was a particularly new field because the first well-designed agenda was initiated by Mark Elvin only in 1990. Both Mark Elvin and Donald Worcester emphasized that it is necessary to do environmental history through interdisciplinary approach. So I think today's conference is aimed for interdisciplinary interaction. So I think this topic perhaps will make us thinking this problem further. It is impossible for me to give a comprehensive review here of the state of environmental history. However, I would like to mention some conferences on environmental history of China and Taiwan from my own experiences in order to provide a glance of what has been done so far and what to do in the future. Mark Elvin and I organized the first international conference held in December 1993 in Hong Kong, sponsored by the grant of the CCK Foundation. After the conference, papers were revised and published both in Chinese and in English. The Chinese version, called 基建所志中国环境史论文集, was published in 1995 by the Institute of Economics, Academia Sinica, because at that time I was still a research fellow of Institute of Economics. And the English version, Sediments of Time, Environment and Society in Chinese History, was published by Cambridge University Press in 1998. I'm not going to go into details of these collections, but I would like to emphasize that most participants of this conference were historians, but they engaged in discussion during the conference with archaeologists, botanists, economists, forester, geographer, and hydrologists. It seems that an atmosphere of interdisciplinary dialogue was well maintained throughout the conference. The second international conference was organized by myself and held in November 2002 at the Preparatory Office of Institute of Taiwan History, Academia Sinica. 21 papers were delivered and discussed, of which 6 were related to China and 15 to Taiwan. But we did not, we organized the papers into 9 themes, but the paper was not published, and some authors have published their papers in journals. The third international conference on Chinese environmental history was held in August 2005 in Nankai University, Tianjin. The conference volume entitled 中国历史上的环境与社会 was edited by Wang Lihua and published in Beijing in 2007. This volume consists of 28 articles, of which 5 dealing with methodology, 5 with irrigation and society, 6 with economic activity and environmental change, 7 with disease and disasters, and another 5 with forests and animals. I also organized another international conference held at the Institute of Taiwan History, Academia Sinica, in November 2006. At this conference, scholars from geology, earth science, atmosphere science, oceanology, environmental science, architecture, literature, history, historical geography, economics, environmental policy studies, and social information altogether presented 34 papers. And we selected 21 articles to form a volume in Chinese, 自然与人为互动环境史研究的视角 Interactions of Nature and Humans, Perspective of Environmental History, was published in December 2008. So this is still a new volume. In addition to these international conferences, many works on environmental history of China have been published in recent years. For instance, Wang Xingguang of Henan explored the ecological and environmental changes in the rise of Xia dynasty, with data discovered by palynologists and archaeologists, as well as materials contained in ancient texts. The Japanese scholar Hara Motoko analyzed various texts on the development and environment in ancient China, with focus on types of soil, trees and grasses, hills and mountains, dryland agriculture, irrigation, and cultivated crops. Robert Marks traced the development of Lingnan region in South China from the Han Dynasty to the Qing Dynasty, with focus on settlement and ecological changes, population increase, climate change, and agriculture production, grain trade and granary, land land reclamation and development of marble fields, exploitation of mountain areas, and disappearance of tigers. Wang Lihua studied the dietary culture of North China in the medieval period by focusing on climate, water, forest, food production, and processing, as well as carrying capacity and population. Cao Xiaohong, he is in Xiamen University, studied social and ecological changes in southern Shanxi during the Ming and Qing dynasties by focusing on climate change, deforestation, soil erosion, water control systems, and management. James Reardon Anderson discussed land use in Manchuria and Inner Mongolia during the Qing dynasty with an emphasis on migration and deforestation. John Richard discussed deforestation and intensify field use in China's internal frontier in Hunan province, in the Yangtze Highland, in Guizhou province, and in Manchuria. Zhao Zhen studied the ecological change in northwest China during the Qing dynasty by emphasizing migration, deforestation, and water resources. In 2004, Bao Maohong of Beijing University gave a quite thorough review on studies of Chinese environmental history and suggested 4 major aspects to be strengthened in the future as follows. First, the theoretical basis of research. Second, the knowledge of ecology and environmental science and the moral concern of contemporary environmentalism among historians. Third, the research on modern and contemporary environmental history of China. And fourth, the research on other countries for enhancing comparison and academic exchanges. And in 2009, at least 3 new books on environmental history of China were available in Japanese, in Korea, and in English, respectively. In her new book, Harap Motoko chose 15 topics such as elephant, food and clothing, fur, the use of iron tools, and development of northern plains, commodities, irrigation, living environment, production of iron tools, agricultural methods, taxation, economic policy, changes in temperature, wood planting, and deforestation for illustrating the environment of ancient China. The Korean scholars Cui Jing discuss forests and swampland in ancient China with an ecological point of view. And Muscolino here on the history, his new book on history of Zhoushan Maritime region marks the first major study of Chinese fisheries from the perspective of environmental history. It is also notable that since the 1980s, researchers have bluntly disclosed environmental degradation and pollution in China. For instance, SZONYI entitled his first book of China, The Bad Earth, published in 1984. And his second book published, he entitled his second book as China's Environmental Crisis. And he concludes in his book, China is obviously not alone in facing a prospect of continuing declining in quality of its environment, nor it is alone in having to deal with it from a position of relative poverty and limited technical research and managerial capabilities, but its relatively limited natural resources endowment, the already dismal state of its environment, its huge and far from stabilized population, and the magnitude of its modernization plans present a uniquely incompatible combination. And another Japanese scholar, Keiji Kojima, traced the development of industrialization in Asia and during the decade in 1950s to 1990s, and he contended that mainland China has grown into the world's largest source of environmental pollution. Elizabeth's economy mentioned the following indicators to show the seriousness of China's environmental degradation. First, 16 of the 20 most polluted cities in the world were in China. Second, air pollution alone caused 300,000 premature deaths every year. Third, more than 70% of the water in five of the 7 major river systems was unsuitable for human contact. Fourth, more than 25% of land have become desert. Fifth, 8 to 12% of China's GDP have been lost due to environmental degradation. And Judith Sapino's book on Mao's war against on Mao Zedong, I think it is very famous, and I don't want to go into detail. Across the Strait, scholars started to introduce concepts related to environmental issues in popular journals such as Science Monthly and China Forum since the 1970s. The environmental protection laws and regulation was also enacted during the 1970s. However, these laws and regulations were not implemented seriously and rigorously for more than 10 years, and local movements for environmental protections became rather active since the 1970s. As for the studies on environmental history of China, they gradually appear since the 1990s, with conferences, as I mentioned above. Well, I have listed 10 fields, 10 subjects that I think it is better for us to study further, so I don't want to go into details. And I only like to mention finally that last year in October, we formed an organization of East Asian environmental history after the first conference of World Environmental History held in August last year. And we already have a website. If you are interested, you can go to have a look. And we already plan to have a conference on 2011. And I hope that through this we can, with this scholarly community, it is hoped that scholars will contribute their works for a better understanding of East Asian environmental history in a global perspective. Sorry, thank you.
I apologize because we have MICAH is both presenter and discussant. We actually decided we'll revert back to the ordinary pattern of hearing the 3 papers and then the 3 discussants. MICAH Muscolino, as Liu Sui-Rong has mentioned, is the author of a brand new book, Fishing Wars and Environmental Change in Late Imperial and Modern China. He's the 2nd member of the Harvard Bang on this panel, a PhD from Harvard, and currently professor of environmental history at the Department of History of Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. MICAH.
Well, to a certain extent, my paper goes in something of a different direction from the one that Professor Liu just presented. But I think that as I get into the content of my talk, it'll be apparent that the problem of human interactions with the marine environment and state efforts to control those interactions or regulate them is really central to what I'm talking about today. So since Ma Ying-jeou's election in March 2008 on a platform of improving ties with the PRC, a new array of direct links between Taiwan and China have come into existence. Yet, direct maritime links have existed between Taiwan and China for decades as goods and people flowed across the strait on an underground basis. Even before martial law ended in 1987, Taiwan and China engaged in direct exchanges through a web of smuggling networks. Now, as I said before, the maritime environment is really crucial to understanding those networks. Taiwan and Southeast China are part of a world of maritime trade and commerce inhabited by fishermen, merchants, and other seafarers. These maritime trade networks, in which mobility and unbridled pursuit of profit reign supreme, have stymied efforts by centralized states on either side of the Taiwan Strait to subject them to fixity and control. So below the high-level Cold War between Taiwan and China, direct commercial exchanges and interactions have taken place outside the realm of state-defined legitimacy. After China's economic reforms of the 1970s, cross-strait encounters between overlapping networks of fishermen and smugglers flourished. Fragmented political authority and ambiguous borders in the strait made illicit movement of people and goods extremely difficult to control. The PRC and ROC's claims to exclusive sovereignty over the strait make prosecuting smuggling and other illegal activities a politically sensitive undertaking. Political division thus facilitated underground cross-strait exchanges as smugglers manipulated separate legal jurisdictions to their own advantage. So, how did all of this get going? The first part of the paper, I talk about the contours and the dynamics of these kinds of cross-strait exchanges that happened outside the realm of what either state in Taiwan or in China defined as legally acceptable. So, from the mid-1950s until the 1970s, the KMT still aspired to retake the mainland by force, and the PRC also threatened to take Taiwan, liberate it, as the parlance of the day said, by military means if necessary. So given the military hostility in the strait and the high level of risk, very little direct trade and travel existed during this period. The favored route was to smuggle goods to Taiwan indirectly via Hong Kong. So actually a lot of goods from the mainland did make it into the island of Taiwan, but they all went through the sort of triangular trade through Hong Kong. It really wasn't until the 1970s when military tensions in the Strait subsided that the direct cross-strait trade networks that make up the topic of my paper really began to coalesce. When the US formally recognized the PRC on January 1st, 1979, China issued a message to compatriots in Taiwan that called for resumption of direct trade links and other kinds of exchanges. From the mid-1970s, the PRC began to welcome Taiwan fishermen to the mainland as a way of beginning to promote cross-strait contacts. The main institutional apparatus for solidifying those links was through reception centers for fishermen from Taiwan, where they could find shelter from typhoons, repair their engines, or obtain other kinds of provisions. So China encouraged these visits as a way of breaking down suspicions and promoting cross-strait contact and eventually hastening reunification. So this was one of the early efforts by the PRC to win the proverbial hearts and minds of the people of Taiwan, starting with the fishing population. Okay, so taking advantage of the PRC's new welcoming attitude, in the mid-1970s, fishing boats from both sides of the Taiwan Straits started to meet and trade goods at what were called black markets at sea. To make these exchanges, fishing boats from Taiwan either entered PRC waters or landed surreptitiously in mainland ports to engage in commerce. So throughout the 1970s, electronic wristwatches, tape recorders, televisions, and other types of goods imported by fishing boats from Taiwan found a ready market in mainland China. Drawn in by the opportunity for profit, local cadres and law enforcement, first in Guangdong and eventually in Fujian, got closely involved in these smuggling networks, granting protection to people who are engaging in illicit trade, and sometimes, according to the sort of state-controlled media, they accepted bribes, collaborated with smugglers, engaged in trafficking illegal goods, generally just spreading bourgeois decadence in its various forms. And so if you read the China Daily or the People's Daily, there's a lot of talk about that in the early 80s and even in the late 70s. But it's the desires of emergent Chinese consumers in the PRC that really determined the contours of this trade, along with the ever-popular electronic wristwatches from Taiwan. In the early 1980s, Chinese fishing boats took a keen interest in picking up other goods from Taiwan and bringing them back to the mainland, such as pocket calculators, batteries, radios, televisions, and cassette decks. Mainlanders were especially fond of music tapes by the pop star Teresa Deng or Deng Lijun. Other hot items included plastic rain gear, cigarette lighters, and of course Playboy magazine, which of course was unavailable in the PRC at the time. Fishing boats from the mainland initially traded for the products that they acquired from the Taiwanese fishing boats with gold, usually in the form of jewelry, silver in the form of old silver dollars and British pounds sterling, jade, ceramics, furniture, and of course the extremely popular Chinese medicine ingredients like ginseng. As gold and silver were available to mainland smugglers dwindled, they started to rely on foreign currency, Hong Kong, US, and eventually even Taiwan dollars to purchase those goods. Taiwan fishermen could also purchase the goods from the mainland, like with Taiwan or US dollars, but still bartering predominated. But it's interesting that you see a kind of rudimentary unified currency market taking shape in these initially bartering, but these sort of commercial networks that were taking shape in the Taiwan Strait based on smuggling. So the PRC and the ROC had rather different stances towards these direct trade contacts. If fishing boats from Taiwan actually landed in mainland ports, PRC officials considered it trade within China's national borders. The PRC only considered it smuggling if boats traded at sea beyond the scope of official control. So another problem consisted of unauthorized transactions of gold, silver, and foreign currency, which were also prohibited. In late 1980 and 1981, the PRC claimed to have made progress in massive anti-smuggling campaigns in Fujian. But once those campaigns eased up, usually they just last for a couple of months and lose momentum, the exchanges on the high seas between fishermen from Taiwan and the mainland resumed in full force. So a lot of exchange activity that the PRC considered illegal was taking place well into the 1980s. The issue for the ROC, Taiwan, is even more complex because it banned all direct cross-strait trade. The problem that made this kind of exchange such a thorny issue was that the ROC still claimed sovereignty over all of the mainland. So did cross-strait commerce count as imports and exports that crossed national boundaries? This was a problem because anti-smuggling regulations only punished illegal import and export of goods. So is trading goods across the Taiwan Strait international trade that can count as smuggling, or is it domestic trade? In order to uphold the principle that the ROC still held sovereignty over all of China, authorities in Taiwan only confiscated the cargo of fishing boats caught transporting mainland goods, but didn't charge them with smuggling. That was the sort of conventional way of dealing with these things into the early 1980s. But there were debates over smuggling's legal definition that raged in Taiwan between 1983 and 1985, with two factions taking shape in the legislative yuan. One faction argued that revising Taiwan's, or the ROC's smuggling laws was necessary since imports from the mainland did not present any security threat. And since revising the law to punish fishermen did nothing about the triangular trade that still existed between China, Hong Kong, and Taiwan, it wouldn't do anything to really eliminate trade with the mainland. Supporters of revision, on the other hand, stressed the security considerations, claiming that China's objective was not trade, but infiltration and eventual reunification with Taiwan. The security concerns eventually triumphed, and in June 1985, revised anti-smuggling regulations were passed. Cross-strait trade now became punishable as smuggling, and the ROC also forbid exporting goods from Taiwan to the mainland or importing goods to Taiwan from communist-controlled areas. So, despite efforts by governments on both sides of the straits to wipe out or at least limit these contacts, clandestine trade persisted well into the 1980s, as the lure of profit led fishing boats to risk punishment. In the second part of the paper, I shifted gears to look at the smuggling hubs that took shape on either side of the Taiwan Strait in the early 1980s. So on the mainland, the main smuggling center was Fujian's Pingtan Island, located only 73 miles from Taiwan. Cross-strait encounters began in Pingtan in 1978 with the establishment of a fishermen reception center. But it's interesting that along with fishermen, during the 1980s, other Taiwanese, such as businessmen or tourists, other kinds of people, could hitch rides on fishing boats to go to Pingtan to do business or sightsee or whatever they wanted to do. So to facilitate cross-strait commerce, Fujian actually set up companies to handle this small-scale trade with Taiwan, and in the 1980s, state-run department stores in Pingtan had counters with cassette recorders, watches, nylon umbrellas. All of this was very upfront. Goods from Taiwan were readily available. By the 1980s, many observers claimed that Pingtan's entire economy depended on trade with Taiwan for its existence. Something like 80% of the fishing boats in Pingtan took part in smuggling. Now, on the Taiwan side, the smuggling hub was Hsinchu's fishing port of Nanliao that really became the counterpart to Pingtan on Taiwan. After Taiwan ended martial law in 1987, smuggling became far easier, and fishermen from Nanliao began to exchange Taiwanese consumer goods for mainland products like I described before. Initially, all of these transactions took place at sea, but by decade's end, practically all of the fishing boats in Nanliao had gone to mainland China at some point or another. An interesting environmental connection in this whole process is the connection between the upsurge in smuggling in Nanliao and the decline in Taiwan's inshore fishery resources due to pollution and overfishing. As marine resources and consequently the income of fishing enterprises in Taiwan collapsed, smuggling became a profitable alternative. As Taiwan's marine fisheries stagnated in the 1980s, the PRC's aquaculture industry was undergoing rapid growth. So fishing boats from Taiwan gave up trying to catch fish and smuggled marine products from the mainland back to Taiwan instead. After 1986, species like yellow croaker, huangyu, which had been rare on fish markets in Taiwan since the 1960s, suddenly grew numerous. And this was basically because the species that had been depleted by overfishing all of a sudden became available from mainland China due to aquaculture. So I'll skip through a couple of sections here. But the last part of the paper, and I think the one that's most worthy of attention in the relationship between history and other sort of disciplines in studying cross-strait relations, is the way in which the conflicts that took place as a result of this illicit cross-strait trade necessitated negotiations, high-level negotiations between leaders in the PRC and ROC. In 1990, ROC and PRC Red Cross officials met secretly on Jinmen Island to hash out an agreement about repatriating illegal immigrants from the mainland who entered Taiwan illegally on fishing boats. In the subsequent years, fishing disputes between fishermen from the mainland and Taiwan actually led to very intricate and I think fascinating disputes in which neither side recognized the authority of the other. And on one instance, a Taiwanese customs patrol officer was taken to the mainland, leading to this huge controversy. Eventually, a team from the ROC Red Cross was allowed to visit Beijing, and eventually the policeman was freed. In another incident, in July 1991, another dispute led to fishermen from Taiwan from the mainland being taken to Taiwan and held in custody. At that point, representatives from the PRC came to Taiwan along with 2 reporters, the first incidents in which journalists from the PRC were able to visit Taiwan. So in the first cross-strait talk between Gu Junfu and Wang Daohan, the main issues up for discussion were these kinds of smuggling, robbery, and other fishing disputes that had been taking place since the early 1980s. So the point that I've tried to make in this paper, and I've gone well over my allotted time, is that in the maritime world that linked Taiwan and China, the line between legitimate and illegitimate activities was a rather blurry one. When large-scale underground trade began in the late 1970s, it consisted of exchanges of local products for Taiwanese consumer goods. By the mid-1980s, the cross-strait trade had broadened to include guns, drugs, and migrants. The basis for economic integration coalesced extremely early at the nodes of contact like Pingtan and Nanliao, where local economies came to center on cross-strait traffic. An interesting theme that I'd like to explore as I revise this paper is the variety in state attitudes towards these exchanges at various levels of government. Local officials promoted cross-strait exchanges because they could generate profits and revenues, while central governments seemed to look on them far less favorably. The problem is that, as I've tried to explain, the smugglers on either side of the strait could manipulate gray areas in sovereignty and legal jurisdiction to carry out their illicit activities and evade punishment. Semi-official dialogue between China and Taiwan followed on the heels of existing cross-straits exchanges as states scrambled to cope with problems that underground contacts created. So anyway, I look forward to comments, and thank you for letting me go over.
I don't know about the fishermen from Nanliao, but the fishermen from Jinmen, when they were caught having gone to the mainland to smuggle, of course, they blamed it on the typhoon. Right. So it's another dimension of the below-the-storm metaphor, that the kinds of smuggling that you've talked about literally went on under the cover of the storm. And if you saw that the hold of the fishing boat was full of watches and Denglijun tapes, you knew typhoon was coming. Our final speaker is Chen Dezhi, a PhD student in the Department of History at Shida.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to attend this conference. I have always been interested in the research of the fishing activities in East Asia waters. To be in line with the theme of this conference, which focuses on the interaction between China and Taiwan, my report is accordingly titled A Preliminary Study on the Beginnings of the Fishery Investigation under the authorities of Taiwan Government General in the Japanese colonial period. It was mentioned in History of Chinese Fishing Industry, published in 1930s, that there were 2 strongholds used by Japan for its aggression of the fishing industry in South China. One was Taiwan, the other was Hong Kong. After Taiwan was taken by Japan, a fishery division was set up in Taiwan Government General to manage its fishing industry, leading to the frequent ravage of the fishing grounds along Fujian coast. Later, Ponglai Fishing Corporation was established in Taiwan, turning the island into the base camp of Japanese incursion into South China's fishery. Aggression theory of this kind directly points out that The erection of above fishery division at the very beginning of Japan's occupations of Taiwan was aimed to aggress on the fisheries in South China. As a result, those fishery investigation activities with the significance of pioneering fishery development was seen through colored glasses, and its historical meaning was accordingly ignored and even accused of aggression. The purpose of this study went beyond aggression theory to explore the background and process of fishery investigation in South China conducted by Taiwan Governor General. In another word, this study was to find out the developing track of the Taiwan Governor General's fishery investigations and the historical meaning of this undertaking. First of all, I want to explore how the fishery investigation started during the initial Japanese colonial period. In terms of fishery administration organization, in August 1895, a fishery section was set up under the Agriculture Division of Settlement and Industry Bureau. This was the beginning of the fishery administration in Taiwan. At that time, the purpose of fishery administration wasn't for the development of fishery. Instead, it was for the protection and the reproduction. With the development of Taiwan's industry, various administrations under Settlement and Industry Bureau gradually became independent, such as Forest Affairs, Mining Affairs, Sugar Affairs, Commerce and Industry Administration. However, it was not until 1918 when the Fishery Administration transformed into a Fishery Division that it started to receive enough attention. Against this background, Taiwan began its fishery investigation activities. In the initial period under Japanese rule, Taiwan had neither professional fishery technician nor fishery research institutions. The investigations were conducted under General Fishery Administration. Nevertheless, the achievements of the fishery investigations under the initial Japanese colonial period were quite impressive. The Settlement and Industry Department published the results of its investigations in the report of the Settlement and Industry Department. The investigation results were rated as very comprehensive by later successors. Secondly, I want to explore Taiwan's fishery investigations and experiments during its Resurgence Period. In 1910, Taiwan Governor General allocated budget for the installation of a special fishery technician and a mechanized fishery experiments vessel to engage in fishery investigations and experiments. This shift didn't mean that Japanese government was preparing for the aggression of Chinese fishing grounds, but it was because it had found that the bonito, this fish, and the ocean current flowing through Taiwan, Okinawa, Kagoshima, Tosa, and other places belong to the same ecological system and hope to be able to fully and effectively develop Taiwan's fishing grounds. Therefore, the Japanese government sent a technician from Ministry of Agriculture and Commerce and a lecturer from Fishery Institute to Taiwan to conduct a fishery investigation on the whole island. At their suggestion, Kashitani Masazuru, a technician from the Fishery Bureau under Ministry of Agriculture and Commerce, was dispatched to double as technician at the Taiwan Governor General. Under his leadership, many junior technicians come to Taiwan, and he also made purchase of mechanized fishery experiment vessel, Ryokai Maru. Since then, Taiwan was able to start its fishery investigation along its coastal and offshore waters. At this moment, the investigation and experiments were revolving around the fishery, especially the bonito fishing, in which the Ministry of Agriculture and Commerce was most interested. Due to the outstanding achievements by Kashitani and Liu Kai-Malu's investigations of the fishing grounds around Taiwan Island, Taiwan's fishing grounds gradually expanded. After that, Taiwan's undertaking of fishery investigations and experiments were conducted with the goal of fishery resources exploitation. On the other hand, after TS'UI-JUNG period, a South marching rush swept through Japan. Even Taiwan's fishery, which was in its developing stage at the time, couldn't be spared from the rush. In September 1917, Taiwan Governor General sent Miyagami Kamehichi to South China to conduct fishery investigation, whose scope covered Guangdong, Fujian, Zhejiang Province, Shanghai in Jiangsu Province, and the British Hong Kong. What's worth our attention is how Miyagami looked at the relations between the fisheries of Taiwan and South China. He believed that Taiwan's fishery experience could serve as an important medium to introduce the fishery modernization into South China. This has exactly reflected the process of Taiwan's introduction of Japan's fishery modernization experience. At last, I would like to explore on what basis those fishery investigations were conducted. First of all, Taiwan Governor General embarked on its first ocean-going fishery investigation in this period. The in-depth investigations such as the situation of oceans, the variety of lives, the suitability of fishery development, all required vessels, machines, and equipment. Between December 1917 and April 1918, Kashitani Masazuru and Liu Kai-Malu vessel embarked on their long voyage of Southeast Asian fishery investigation. In 1920, the report was republished titled The Fishery in Southern Ocean. The report contained the detailed description of geography, climates, fisheries, agriculture, manufacturing industry, and fish markets in various areas. Also, included were the fishery experiments, ocean current investigation, water temperatures, and specific weight observation conducted by Liu Kai-Malu vessel. The achievements of this investigation took Taiwan's fishery investigation and experiment from its coastal waters to ocean-going fishing. Meanwhile, it also made Taiwan's fishery investigation and experiment team became the crucial members of later fishery investigation undertaken in South China. In August 1919, Kashitani Masazuru was transferred to the technician of the Korea Government General. Then, in November the same year, Miyagami was promoted to the post of technician at Taiwan Government General. After Miyagami's graduation from the Fishery Department of Tokyo Imperial University, Miyagami started to work as a junior technician in Taiwan Government General. In May 1919, he was promoted to the post of technician of Taipei District. Later, he was further promoted to technician of Taiwan Government General. With a very complete Taiwan-related work experience, Miyagami took over this undertaking and started the fishery investigation in South China. In early 1920, there were two fishery investigations conducted by Adachi Seizo, a technician on board Liu Kai-Malu. In 1921, Adachi served as a technician at Taiwan Government General. After his graduation, he followed Kashitani to join the undertaking of Taiwan Government General's fishery investigation and experiments. Accordingly, Adachi had accumulated a complete Taiwan-related work experience too. We can say that the period of Kashitani can be seen as a period when Japanese experience was introduced into Taiwan. The period after that can be viewed as a period when Taiwan's experience was brought into its full play. Compared with the report in early 1910s, the investigation report for 1920s was more in-depth and detailed. Additionally, the report also contained Ryokai Maru vessels, fishery investigations and experiments, especially the distribution of seawater temperatures and others. This kind of achievements was actually built on the development and experience of Taiwan's fishery investigation and experiments. The Taiwan experience of those fishery technical officials who once took part in the fishery investigation in South China are valuable. For example, Adachi spent as long as 13 years in Taiwan, while both Kobayashi and Aoki had joined the team in Southeast Asia under the leadership of Kashitani. Kodo also participated as a technician of Sea and Land Industry Company Limited. To sum up about the above description, the beginning of Taiwan Governor General's fishery investigation actually had its academic origin and was closely related to the development of Taiwan's fishery investigation and experiments. Scientific history in modern time is in fact a history on the development of humans' exploitation of nature resources. So, from this viewpoint, we can say that it was very natural for Taiwan's fishery investigation and experiments to begin from its coast to offshore and further expand to Southeast Asia and South China. This is the demonstration of both Taiwan's fishery investigation and experiments ability and its aspiration for the exploitation of nature resources. So, thank you for listening.
And let's move right on to the discussants. We have three discussants, one per paper. Our first discussant, as the saying goes, needs no introduction.
Well, I want to just say what a pleasure it is to be able to comment on Professor Liu's paper, which presents a very concise and I think extremely valuable overview of the emerging field of Chinese environmental history. Professor Liu, of course, along with Mark Elvin, was really instrumental in articulating an agenda for this field in the early 1990s and did a great deal to really bring it into existence. So, as I said before, the short paper presents a nice summary of Chinese environmental history's development, as well as some of its achievements and a prospectus for future research. But what I'd like to do in my comments is try to draw out some of the themes and points raised in her paper that seem most relevant to our discussion about cross-strait relations. One way of trying to pinpoint those themes is by asking the question, can Taiwan's environmental history and its current environmental concerns be separated from Chinese environmental history or China's contemporary environmental dilemmas? This, of course, is something of a rhetorical question because I, for one, don't think that that kind of separation is really possible. The reason, of course, is that the natural phenomena that are environmental history subject matter heed no political divisions. Fish and sulfur dioxide plumes, for instance, migrate across borders with impunity. Cultural and intellectual trends in human views of the environment migrate just as easily. So, albeit with highly significant local variation, you can trace the circulation and the flow of ways of thinking about nature across national borders as well. Only in the realm of policy making does a preference for the national units have any validity, and even then not entirely, because oftentimes countries adopt foreign models to inspire their own environmental initiatives. So for these reasons, environmental changes that happen in Taiwan and in China inevitably become cross-strait issues and have largely unexplored implications for cross-strait relations. So one of the things that I'd like to ask Professor Liu to comment on is her take on some of these environmental issues that have had the capacity to move across the Taiwan Strait, either from China to Taiwan or vice versa. So the question in other words is, what are some of these environmental currents that have either flowed, floated, drifted, or oozed across the Taiwan Strait? I can think of a number of them just off the top of my head. Clearly, China's dependence on coal is a major source of air pollution. Desertification in northwest China creates huge dust storms that we know have been able to blow out of China's borders as far east as the west coast of North America. Do these kinds of transnational environmental trends affect Taiwan's environment? And then how so, right? Another theme that demands attention is one that has been sort of at the heart of this panel is the degradation of marine ecosystems in the Taiwan Strait, whether due to pollution, overfishing. I'm curious about the ways in which those types of environmental changes have impacted marine resources such as fish, aquatic plants, or other organisms in the Taiwan Strait. So some specific questions that I'd like to hear Professor Liu's thoughts about are the following. How do China's environmental problems affect Taiwan or vice versa? Building on that, how have groups or individuals in the PRC and Taiwan cooperated or interacted in confronting some of the environmental challenges that they both inevitably have to share? Have there been person-to-person contacts in undertaking these environmental initiatives? Have they taken place through NGOs on both sides of the strait, or simply academic research institutes? It's interesting that a lot of that kind of collaboration is already very much apparent in the field of environmental history, where historians and other scholars on both sides of the Taiwan Strait regularly come together at academic conferences, join organizations to discuss and move forward with the field of environmental history in East Asia. So I think this bears out a point that Professor Liu brought up in her paper, which is that environmental history, like much of intellectual life as a whole, has drawn energy from society at large, especially concerns about environmental issues and popular environmentalism that emerged in the 1970s. So this leads to another question, namely, how are Taiwan and China's environmental movements linked? What's the nature of those connections? And what do they have to say about cross-strait ties since environmentalism really became a major global phenomenon in the 1970s? Finally, and this is sort of a more speculative question, is does potential exist for cross-strait cooperation in environmental regulation and monitoring, especially in the shared marine environments that we've talked about in the papers given by the other members of this panel? Or is it already taking place and we just don't really know about it, right? So I think that one thing that Professor Liu's paper has definitely made us think about and made me think about is the really importance of the environment as an aspect of cross-strait relations and the extent to which interactions between people and nature really haven't been taken into account when we engage with the issue of cross-strait relations. So hopefully some of our discussion can reflect upon these issues, and I really look forward to hearing what Professor Liu has to say about them.
MICAH, our second discussant commenting on Micah's paper is Dustin Wang from the Institute of Political Science.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to say thankfulness to the organizers of this conference for inviting me to participate and also to have this very good opportunity to read, possibly to be one of the first persons to read Professor Muscolino's paper. To be a discussant, I would like to share some of my ideas with all of you, and possibly, I won't say it is a comment, but it is a supplement to Professor's paper and also his presentation. The reason for me to use the PowerPoint, there are two reasons for this. One is I'm a quite absent-minded person, easy to forget the point. Therefore, I have to use the PowerPoint. And secondly, I believe that PowerPoint very possible can make my point more powerful. Therefore, allow me to use the PowerPoint to discuss Professor Muscolino's paper. In his paper and also in his presentation, he mentioned, so far I can recognize, he mentioned quite a lot of things. One of them, or possibly two of them, is about the sovereignty issues between two sides of the Taiwan Strait. Another thing is the security issue. For Taiwan, we always concerned with the security issues when we face to our big brother from the other side. Therefore, I would pay more attention on those two issues so that my points will be on those two. First of all, I would say that for Taiwan and China, we have different perspectives on the underground transactions. Professor Muscolino, in his paper and also in his presentation, mentioned about this. I would say that from Taiwan, we would say smuggling is a kind of illegal activity. So it must be under the control of the governmental administration. However, from the mainland China, they always think that this kind of activity is a kind of small-scale trade between two areas of one China. Under these different perspectives, we would say that from the outside looking, possibly for many people, they would treat this kind of activities just for purely economic issues. However, when we look inside deeply, we would say this kind of smuggling activities concerns with highly political considerations inside. Therefore, I would say first, Professor Muscolino's paper, he gave us a quite clear impression and also the outlines about what was going on during the period of 1970s to the 1990s for those 30 years. People always say that when we look at the cross-strait relations, we would say that is a kind of, just like we are watching a painting drawing from the Impressionist. When you look at the cross-strait relations from a distance, you would say, well, I look at it very clear. However, if you are getting closer, you will be puzzled and confused by what was going on there. But from Professor Muscolino's paper, he used quite a lot of cases not only showing that he can manage in the language, I mean the Mandarin and the Chinese text quite well, but also he could understand what was going on and tell us about the story inside. Therefore, I would say Professor Muscolino, just like the realism painter, to showing the clarified picture about what is going on. Therefore, when we move on to the what Taiwan treated smuggling and illegal immigration, I would categorize it into three parts. First is we think that the smuggling and the illegal immigration is a kind of acts committing illegally. Secondly, this kind of act or activities infringing Taiwan's national security. And thirdly, for protecting its sovereignty and legal status. Therefore, Taiwan or Taiwanese government has to take some action to face and to control this kind of illegal activities. Possibly one case that I could be a supplement to Professor Muscolino's paper. It happened in 1999. At that time, one of the 60 Mirage flight Taiwan bought from France, due to the jet engine died out caused by birds. Therefore, one of the 60 Mirage fell into the sea area about 10 nautical miles away from Hsinchu County. I showed that location with the red dot. Therefore, you could see that is very close to the coastline of Taiwan Island. Just about 2 weeks later, the Taiwanese government, at that time under the administration of the police, they savaged that wreckage. However, during the savage action, a couple of mainland fishing vessels were found wandering around the accident location, therefore very suspected. And one of them, one of the mainland fishing vessel, its name or its code under the Minzhu 5318 was taken back to Taiwan. And after a thorough check, we found out that that fishing vessel was equipped with advanced scientific research devices. Therefore, this aroused the issue, national security issue for Taiwan. We would think there are quite a lot, there might be something wrong within them. Being a professor teaching international law at the local universities, I would like to show some of the regulations from Taiwan and saying about the policies and also the treatment from my government. There is a law called the Law of Ships concerning quite a lot of things about the ship's registration and also the management. I believe that this kind of law would be also found in different countries. Under that law, Article 2, to define the term Republic of China flagship, it says that this is a ship which is approved by and registered in the Shipping Administration Authority pursuant to the Republic of China laws. And also from the act governing relations between peoples of the Taiwan area and the mainland area, 两岸人民关系条例, under that act, Article 29 says that no mainland vessels, civil aircraft, or other means of transportation may enter into the restricted or prohibited waters of Taiwan area. Therefore, we can find that there are actually 3 different categories of ships under Taiwan's legal perspectives. One is our ship, to be managed under our domestic law. And second one, that is the non-ROC ship, that is under the management of the international law, of course. But however, we still have this kind, the third kind of ship, that is the special, under the special law of the act governing the relationship between two sides of the Taiwan Straits. And secondly, second supplement I would like to put is about the regulations within Taiwan. In 1992, we promulgated the restricted area and prohibited area like this. But in 1999, we also enact the territorial and contiguous zone map to showing the different areas, and therefore you can find they are a little bit different, but they merged together in 2004. And according to the Act, we also can find that the component authorities may drive it away if we found the ship coming to the restricted area or prohibited area. We would have the certain kind of administrative measures to control them. Therefore, I would put into, due to the time restraint, I would put into a very short summary that the relationships between Taiwan and mainland China create a very unique situation. Politically speaking, it is severely separate. Economically speaking, they are highly exchanged. And legally speaking, they are extremely persist from two sides of the governments. Thank you for your attention and wishing you have a happy new year. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Wang. Your PowerPoint, I think, will create great confusion for future historians as when they're excavating the history of cross-straits relations 100 years from now, they'll look at your slide about underground trade and say, but in 2010, the cross-strait tunnel wasn't built yet. So well, I hope you better destroy the PowerPoint or you'll create a terrible confusion in the future. The final discussant, Lin Yuru, also from the Institute of Taiwanese History here at the Academia Sinica. Yuru.
It's my honor to attend this event. Mr. Chen Dezhi's paper titled South China's Fishery Investigation was launched by the Office of the Taiwan Governor General in the 1920s. He attempts to rebuild using very rich first-hand historical materials the course of how the office implemented the fishery survey in the Taiwan coasts, Southeastern Asia, and even southern China since the Japanese occupied Taiwan in 1895 till 1923. Through this argument, the author first questioned the bias that had always been from the aggression theory to explain the fishery survey of the colonial government, and from the perspective of colonial modernity. He demonstrated how the government established the scientific administration and the fishery survey, through which the experience and the Japanese fishery modernization thus passed on to Taiwan. At the end, for further development of fishery resources, the experience that was successfully tested in Taiwan was naturally transferred to the waters of South China and Southeast Asia gradually. In other words, there are clear contexts of academic survey in two of the fishery surveys conducted in South Pacific and South China in the 1920s. There is scarcity of studies on Taiwan's fishing industry during this period of Japanese occupation. Mr. Chen's paper is the first thesis with detailed discussion of the fishery test course done by the office in the early Japanese colonial era. Indeed, it expresses original activity and the importance of the theme. His ability to collect and use historic data is quite excellent. Last year, I also started using fishery survey data of the colonial government in 1895 to 1898 to reconstruct Taiwan's fishery industry in the 19th century. Having read the thesis paper, I gained an insight into the fishery survey and the relevant reports of the office in the early stage. To focus on the academic origin of fishery survey and clarify its evolution and the context are important contribution of this article, which has been of considerable help to me. But some relevant information may be of some concern to help further improve this article. Here are some thoughts. First, the fishery survey of office in the Japanese colonial period is indeed an important issue. However, while the course of fishery survey in these articles was discussed only up to 1923, we all know that after the 1930s, Japanese militarism was high and their intentions to invade China were more obvious, and the whole nation had entered the era of industrial militarization. And this atmosphere of the time also affected the colonial government's fishery policy and the overall layout of the fishery industry. Therefore, was the fishery survey undertaking still carried on in 1930s? Were the motive and the nature obviously different from the early stage of Japanese ruling? This issue should be worthy of further study. Second, this article further divided the fishery survey of the early stage of Japanese ruling into two sub-stages, 1895 and the 1896 to 1897 period, and compared in detail the difference between the content of the survey report and the specific book later published by DISCUSSANT Bureau of Office of the Taiwan Governor General, which greatly helped us to understand and master the survey content made in this period. However, it can be seen in Table 2 that this period of surveys appeared to have been carried on continually from 1895 to 1898. It should be reconsidered whether it is necessary to subdivide the stage. I personally deem that this period can be comprehended from the perspective of colonial governmental survey for industrial foundation of the new territory. The density of their surveys is very high, and the different technicians often repeatedly surveyed the same region. So, apart from various course surveys as listed in page 6 and 7 of this article, there are some omissions. Third, as this article points out, there are indeed signs of Japanese experience transplantation in the fishery survey of the early stage of Japanese rule. Because of the language barrier, the quality of its investigations of survey accuracy is doubtful for all, may have applied directly to the Japanese fishery knowledge systems in Taiwan's fishing. However, according to Takada's survey diary, At each location of Tainan County, he only stayed for 1 or 2 days, but his survey report is detailed and 160 pages long, which obviously makes it unlikely the survey course conducted in this period seems worthy of further follow-up. It may have been that they were still heavily relying on older bureaucratic records of the Qing dynasty or the assistance of local elites. On the other hand, we can also see that the surveyors constantly crystallized Taiwan Han Chinese about their very naive backward fishing technology with superior colonial mentality, or may simply have used the Japanese fishing method to interpret the Taiwan fishery method. In further contrasted, in the description of Qing glaciers and the fishery report in the Japanese ruling period about Chinese traditional fishery, this phenomena should be better highlighted. In fact, Taiwan fishermen today still use older fishing terms from the Qing dynasty to name the traditional fishing method, rather than the fishery knowledge imposed by the colonial. In other words, the character of colonialism in the process of this fishing experience and how the Taiwan fishermen understood and accepted the scientific fishing knowledge and the response could be considered again through this article or through further study in the future. Finally, one last question. The book, the report of settlement and the industry department was published by the Greater Japan Fishery Association in 1896 in Tokyo. What is the relationship between the Great Japan Fishery Association and their survey in 1895? Thank you.
All right. Thank you for three thoughtful papers and three very thoughtful sets of comments. A different kind of interdisciplinarity in this panel. The papers are all historical, but they deal with a very wide range of issues, historiographical issues, economic and legal issues, institutional and colonial issues, all, of course, revolving around the maritime environment. It's been a long 2 days, but let's take advantage of, let's not miss the opportunity to pose some questions and comments to the authors of these papers and the discussants. Sarah.
I don't know if it's a question or a comment, but for MICAH, I was really struck in your paper by not only the flexibility in what counts or what's considered smuggling, but also the very creative ways that particularly mainland Chinese fishermen use the PRC's rhetoric of one China against itself. And I'm wondering, I'm wondering two things. One, is there any kind of similar rhetorical discursive counterpart on the Taiwan side to that strategy? And also, it made me think, and this is a comment, that I actually noticed that Chinese spouses do precisely the same thing when they encounter difficulties in dealing with the mainland Chinese bureaucracy that tries to isolate them or discriminate against them for marrying a Taiwanese, and they use that rhetoric of one China to kind of buttress their own position against those claims.
I have a question. I have a quick question. I'm really struck by the absence in your paper of 事实, which from the perspective of Fujian land dwellers, is the smuggling center. What's going on there? Is it possible that there are multiple rhetorics of what was going on, and the people engaged in the trade have one narrative, and land people have another narrative? Or how do we explain that there are clearly different ways of thinking about the smuggling centers in those early years?
Right. Should I, well, let's just wait.
Yeah, let's get one more question.
A question for Professor Liu. And I was wondering, so if one could think about a community of researchers doing environmental history across the Strait, then to what extent one might be able to move from that to begin thinking about a community of environmental activists or civic organizations, drawing on that body of knowledge and engaging in civic actions. So if there are differences between the two sides or intersections between the two sides, what might be the factors or variables? And then a quick question for Mr. Chen, namely, can you say something about the use of the results of all these investigations? Was the content of the report, how was the content of the report disseminated?
Last chance? Oh, okay, well, we'll make up some time, which will make Welsh happy. Responses from the three presenters?
I would like to thank Dr. Muscolino raised so many questions, but I cannot answer them all. I would like to talk about two or three questions. First is about the air pollution. Certainly, when we in every years we will have some seasons that we suffer from the dust from across the strait. And then the weather, the sky will be so gray, and I think that the particles in the air is so uncomfortable, and that's true. And for this climate change, the study of climate change, I think there are a lot already have exchange of scholars. For instance, our director of the environmental change often go to mainland China to have meetings with scholars related to climate change. And even though earthquake is a natural disaster, but in recent years we have scientists going across the Strait to deal with the disaster, particularly for earthquake. And the other question I can talk about is the related to environmental issues is disease. For instance, the last year, recently, I finished a study on the disease caused by Chinese liver frog. Of course, the Chinese liver frog was introduced get by people because people like to eat raw fish. It is freshwater fish, not the marine fish. And the reason is that the Chinese people used to feed fish with excrements, either of human beings or of animals, and that caused the pollution in the water. And people eat the fish. And both in China and in Taiwan, people have particularly those Cantonese, have this habit of eating raw fish dishes. And in Taiwan, this disease has been cured by medicine and has been controlled in many years. But in China, the percentage of patients are still very high. And in recent years, the cross-strait traveling in the cross-strait, the merchant come back and forth, and they ate raw fish in China and get disease and come back to Taiwan, and then they will introduce the fish into another cycle again. So this is a very good example for this cross-strait environmental protection. And others, well, and about Wenxin's question, I think so far, I don't think particularly those NGOs already have any formal contact across the strait. But I think both environmental NGOs are very active in China in recent years and in Taiwan.
Tim, our timekeepers have done such a wonderful job keeping us disciplined just to really make their life impossible. I'm going to allow Tim to interject a question.
Thank you.
Into the comments.
I'm sorry, it came to me after you closed the question taking. It occurs to me that most of the discussion about the environmental matters has been about problems. And I'm wondering about the aspect of the environment as a resource, and in particular about marine life, which human beings want to consume. To what extent is that a dispute area, and how is that managed? You said aptly that, MICAH, that fish know no boundaries, national boundaries. But is there are there claims to certain catch amounts and to certain entitlements on both sides, and does that how are those kinds of things adjudicated?
In many Taiwanese fishing boats, there are lots of workers from mainland China, 大陆渔工. Now, in recent years, so this is one phenomenon because of lack of laborers in Taiwan, and then so employ mainland people to serve as the fish workers on the fishing boat. So this is one thing, and the another question is perhaps pollution maybe also already caused some fish, marine fish being affected, and so whether these fish are safe for eating perhaps will become a problem.
Your response, yeah.
Okay. See, I guess I'll just answer the questions, the first two questions, and then we'll move on to more time. So as for Sarah's question about how the sort of rhetoric of One China has influenced the discourse that justifies these sorts of flows across the strait, yeah, it actually works both ways. You can see a lot of for example, people who, starting in the late 80s, but especially in the early 90s, came into Taiwan illegally from the mainland via fishing boats. A lot of that rhetoric, their justification was, well, it's One China, so we can come here. It's not really a big problem. But it does work the other way with fishing boats and other kinds of people who are engaged in illicit traffic with the mainland from Taiwan, saying, well, you can't tell us that we're doing anything wrong because the government says that it's all One China. So it's actually a kind of common ground, right, for people who want to either move or exchange goods across the strait. They can deploy it strategically in order to justify what they're doing, right? So it definitely is something that, the discourse itself cuts across the Taiwan Strait in a lot of ways. So with regards to Mike's question about why I didn't cover different parts of Fujian, it was already too long to begin with. So yeah, definitely Fishery is a place where you could see a lot of smuggling. But when they talk about the real cross-strait smuggling centers. I mean, there are lots of different kinds of smuggling, but it's always Pingtan and Namiao. That's the connection because they're so close. I mean, it's the shortest distance. So there's lots of different things that get smuggled. You know, people smuggle cars from Japan into mainland China or, you know, via Hong Kong. So yeah, Suzhou is a huge place for smuggling, but when it comes to this sort of direct cross-strait contact, it's more the two places that I talked about, but I probably could have culled it. I do have examples from other places that just didn't make it into the paper.
I was actually more wondering why some places are more important in some people's stories,
Yeah.
rather than as absolute values of goods exchanged.
Yeah, that's a question that I unfortunately don't have an answer to. It might just be related to the kind of illegal activities that they were engaged in or exposed to or a party to. So yeah, and with regards to Tim's question, I mean, clearly this is a major issue in cross-strait relations. There are lots of these sorts of fishing disputes that happen between PRC fishermen and ROC fishermen, but it also does sort of relate to what Mike SZONYI talked about in his paper yesterday about how, you know, it's like the chicken and peanut kind of thing where, you know, people's fishing enterprises that are very much interested in their own economic gain will use this sort of discourse of cross-strait relations to justify getting a bigger share of the fish out there. As for bilateral negotiations between the PRC and ROC about catch limits or things like that, they're far away from having anything that's really workable in terms of that, just because the kind of communication and dialogue hasn't really taken shape yet, at least not to my knowledge. So anyway, hopefully that sort of answers the question to some extent.
I'm grateful for Professor Lin's comment. I think all of this suggestion or question is helpful to me, especially these articles. And I will try to revise these articles according discussion or this suggestion after this conference. Especially the explanation of each period, especially the initial, no matter the initial stage or resurgence period, or the limited of 1923. However, in this article, I try to focus on the beginnings of the South China, China fishery investigation under the authority of Taiwan Governor General. To know how beginnings occur is why I concentrate on the trend of the investigation from 1917 to 1923. Thus, I agree with Professor Lin, her opinion. After 1930s, the development of fishery investigation is really needed us to be to research in the future. And I also agree with Professor Lin's opinion that not only the investigation after 1930s is worth researching, but also the knowledge of this investigation is worth more attention. When Chinese use the aggression theory to interpret the development of Japan, on the other side, Japanese hold the progressive view to describe the circumstance of fishing industry in Taiwan and Southeast Asia and South China. Therefore, I also think that the character of colonialism in the process of this fishing experience and how the Taiwan fishermen understood and accept the scientific fishing knowledge is important. And Professor Lin's last question is about the Great Japan Fisheries magazine, why it published the investigation in 1895, but I think it is an important question because I could answer it, but I know how to resolve it. Maybe we should to find the magazine of Great Japan Fishery. I believe that in this magazine must have some information for us to resolve this answer. And this question is also important because it may show us that the relationship between Japan and Taiwan. And the professor yes the question. And would you please kindly repeat your question?
That's all right. We can talk about that afterwards. I just wanted to know who were the people actually using the information or knowledge produced in those reports. And did that information actually got to the fishermen?
I think this report and this report was used by the company of by the fishery company, especially in Taiwan or in Japan. Some company were conducted by Japanese, but also there are also some company was conducted by Taiwanese. So and at the same time, I believe that Chinese people also could use this information at that time.
Thank you very much. We're running rather late, although by my reckoning we've caught up 6 minutes under my chairmanship. So so I think we'll proceed directly to the round table. Thank you very much for the presenters and the discussants. And as my last act as chair, I would just like to take this opportunity to thank the conference. We've thanked the organizers repeatedly. Thank you. But can we also thank the conference staff who's just done a wonderful job looking after us over the last few days. So thank you very much. And to Caverly.
The roundtable discussion will begin right now. Our moderator for the roundtable discussion is Dr. Yushan Wu.
Has anyone got a copy of this summary below the storm? Well, thank you very much. This is the most relaxed portion of this conference. We have already conducted, let me see, 7 sessions, right? 7 sessions in 2 days. And I would like to congratulate all of you for this wonderful job. And as we have said at the very beginning of the conference, that the purpose is to explore interdisciplinary study of cross-strait relations and see how this format can bring about new perspectives. And this is exactly what we like to do by summing up some of the advances in perspectives as we can see it. And this page is a very simplistic summary of my misreading of your papers. The way I did it is to use either current or past to show that we are telling stories about things in the past or something that is evolving. And I use in between literally means that those papers that are dealing with things, people, and objects that are literally between Taiwan and mainland China. And cross-strait suggests that the impact of landing is on either the mainland or on Taiwan. And the Wheeler paper is, I think, comparative, even though he also talks about and the possible demonstration impact. But I think it's a very good comparative paper. So let me go through this very rapidly, and I think this is one way of organizing things, and probably papers falling into the same box would then be able to see their relationship. For current and in between, I'm very interested in seeing that we have quite a concentration on the offshore islands, and I learned a lot about that, like Kimmon's local politics, cast in cross-strait context, the SZONYI paper, the casino thing, the Jinxia Bridge, and so on and so forth. And then the Lin paper, Lin Weiping, is about the multi-purpose pilgrimage that links Taiwan, Matsu, and Fujian. In between, but in the past, the CHEN paper that was just presented is about fishery exploration under the Japanese colonial rule, and the MUSCOLINO paper, the underground activities at sea from 1970s through the 1990s. It's interestingly enough, these two periods happen to be periods in which the two sides of the Taiwan Straits were kind of hostile to each other, and so the relationship developed during that period of time would be quite interesting to take a look at. And cross-strait, we have most of the papers concentrated in this area. For the past, well, not literally the past, because Ye Wenxin talked about this grand competing historiographies, one continental, one maritime, and that compete to define Taiwan's history. And the Western paper is on the official media perspectives on the other side, the Central Daily News and the People's Daily. And current things, politics, even though we want to take a multi-disciplinary approach, we still find a lot of papers in this area. The Wu paper is about the contending theories. The Dittmer and Wu paper is about what drives the cross-strait rapprochement. The Zhegan's paper is about the limited or the adjustment of the state power to meet to how does it face the economic dynamism in cross-strait relations. Lin Gang's paper, and please forgive me for putting you in the same category as Zhu Yinghan's paper, because I think both of you come up with something that is more advocative, proposing something, the proposals that is good for cross-strait peace. And Zhu Yinghan's paper is about Taiwan's soft power, about how tail must retain attached to the dog in order to exercise some influence. And then the second category in this box is family. The Friedman paper is one in which the talks about the dependent and reproductive role of the Chinese spouses in Taiwan. And related to that, Taiwan's patriarchal culture that also hurts foreign spouses, and there comes in the Fang and Zhang paper and the Tang paper. And the Liao Yuanhao paper is about the legal discrimination against mainland spouses. So these are the family papers. And the students' papers, the Lan and the Wu paper, is demand and supply side analysis of why Taiwan students want to go to the mainland. And the Gold paper is about the American students in Taiwan and the impact that they received as a result of their language training in Taiwan. And finally, the comparative paper, the Wheeler paper, Blind Eye Governance in China and Taiwan. It is related to their authoritarian political system. So, but it has a cross-strait dimension, namely the demonstration effect. This is the best I can do after the conference by putting all those papers in specific categories. You really don't have to agree with me on that, and I have done not a good job in doing that, but I think all the papers have been laid out here. And so why don't we start talking about how we have gained from the conference by taking an interdisciplinary perspective. Shall we start with the origin of the idea, Professor Ye?
This feels like a punishment. Okay. Well, so Professor Wu has insisted that I vindicate this approach, namely, what is the reward of interdisciplinary dialogue? And the very fact that we've been abandoned by all colleagues in political science today it doesn't seem to say too much about the success of this approach. But nonetheless, even though they have abandoned us, we don't necessarily have to abandon them. So on the basis of the conversations of these 2 days, I suppose I would simply like to share maybe 3 points or observations. So the first thing is that virtually all papers deal with issues of state and society in processes of interactions. And I think it was Sarah who raised this question about the rigidity of notions of state or society, and in other words, the institutional rigidity or the organizational formality when one thinks about state, society, and whatnot. So temperamentally, perhaps, it's not only stylistically, temperamentally, maybe inspirationally, there appears to be a school of us or a faction among ourselves who prefer the clarity, the coherence, the rigidity in thinkings about state and society. And there might be another school, the temperamentally, which discursively would prefer to deal with things in an open, in a less structured form. In other words, power in a less formal zone, or forces of ambiguity, possibilities of marginality, and the open-ended nature of the zone in between within which power is nonetheless exercised. So that's observation number one. In other words, temperamentally or stylistically, we have two trajectories. It doesn't mean that either one simply has to be hegemonic. It simply means that these two could be mutually complementary. So from there, we move on to the second set of temperamental difference, namely the issue of agency versus structure. Again, temperamentally, there are people who prefer things to move along in a way that has this momentum embedded in the structural forces of things. And then there are also some of us who would prefer to place greater emphasis on the contingency factor or on the stylistic matter of human beings doing things in situations within which they receive imperfect information, they interact with each other without perfect understanding, they have contradictory objectives, they find themselves occupying impossible positions, torn in dilemma, etc. And then so going from there, as we try to explain or describe courses of action to follow or to recommend, whether for states or for groups of people or whatnot, then of course there can be differences of sorts. And then I think the third thing, the third point that is getting out of our conversations was also there was this issue of governance, especially with regard to right? Yes, to stop? Well, there's, what? Oh, to hurry, okay. So there was the issue about governance. Now, of course, formal, legalistic, structured action of states or of administrations carry consequences. And this morning's two panels both point to this whole question about the linkage between family strategies, individual actions, and the power and authority of the state on anything, a whole range from citizenship, marriage law, inheritance, custody, migration, voting rights, work permits, you name it, passports. But then there are also, this whole issue about when the state is in a position to do something, that is the actual practice of governance. There is this famous thesis, it's called blind eye governance, or responsive authoritarianism. In other words, when the mere framework of setting up these possibilities does not necessarily exhaust the possibilities or the range of experiences on the ground. So I suppose, once again, that addresses a temperamental or stylistic difference among ourselves about what we would prefer to stress. And then in the end, our colleagues in political science would tell us, you get your two choices, either confrontation or conciliation, either war or peace, and then you try to figure things out in between. But then the two panels this afternoon inspire me to think that even among people without a common ground of such as, say, shared identity for shared action, is it possible that they construct different kinds of commonality using that as the basis for shared action, or at least desired shared aspirations? So does knowledge provide such a foundation for shared aspiration or for at least civic endeavors? And then the other form of possible modality of cross-strait interaction might be complementarity. That is, the panel on media inspired me to think that if you have certain strengths on the one hand from one side and another set of attributes on this other side, the two sides do not necessarily have to get into a straightforward relationship of trade or exchange. It doesn't have to be barter, but rather that the two sides coming together to perhaps there is the possibility of reconfiguring relationships of interaction, and on the basis of that, so moving beyond confrontation or conciliation and thinking about alternative bases, either of common action or complementarity. So those were the points that I got out of our discussions.
So shall we listen to Professor Gold?
I think the Chi paper would also go. You didn't have her paper on the in-between, the one on the Jinman, I didn't see it on here. Okay. Well, first of all, I would also like to thank Yushan and Wenshin for organizing really an excellent conference. I'm not just being cutchy. It was very, very excellent. Now, I've been asked to speak, but from a sociological perspective, on what I took away from this. I'm a little. I don't know if I'm representing social science here, which would be a dangerous thing. But I don't see all of this. I mean, the sort of self-fulfilling prophecy about political science as being so rigid and so dead and so set in its ways. I think sociology for sure isn't. Sociology likes to see itself as a synthetic social science, and it's certainly not news, I think, to most sociologists that there be an interdisciplinary or cross-disciplinary or multidisciplinary approach to understanding an issue. So I don't find that controversial, and I don't find it, but maybe that's just my my individual perspective. I think what sociologists like to do or see ourselves as doing is stepping back, or what we can bring to the table is ability to step back and to integrate masses of data and try to understand patterns that are emerging. And that's why we have to rely on the work of people from many, many different disciplines and many different types of approaches. Now, for me, one of the things that I took away from this conference, and I think it corroborates one of the things that Wen-Shin said, is I'm interested in the process of institutionalization. I think this is one of the things that sociology brings to the table. And that what we have seen here, by which I mean the elaboration of sets of rules to govern behavior in particular fields of social life, trying to understand the actors, their interests, their actions, what areas of social life become incorporated, explicitly incorporated, where the rules are explicitly stated. Who has the power to determine what the rules are and the power to enforce those rules? At what time are officials, at what stage are official actors drawn in to this process of articulating the rules and enforcing the rules that govern social behavior? At what level of the state? And I think when we look through these various papers, we can see that there's this temporal aspect, there's different people who have been drawn into this process. And we've looked at levels of the state from very local levels to county levels, city levels, the national level. Some of these things are carried on through officials, and some of them are carried on very much at a societal level. And I think that one of the things that I've also seen, one of the ways that I would, another way to order your list here, Yushan, is we're looking here at the interaction between the micro and the macro levels. Micro-macro link, or also a mesolink, has come across a number of times. And I also don't see a state society approach as being rigid. I think it sets out two major sets of actors and then sets them in motion to look at their interaction across these different levels and also through time. And I think that one of the things that the papers presented at this conference have really been successful at doing is showing showing the interaction between individual lives, individual stories, individual ways of seeing things, and organizational and even international cross-organizational levels. That cross-strait relations, as shown in these papers, are carried by individuals and individuals who have interests. And I think that's one of the things that I've really found exciting about the presentations here. I think the papers have moved between and among all of these different levels, that we can see, we've understood or presented how individuals see, understand, construct cross-strait relations, and how these change over time. I think the importance of an attention to historical span and change have been critical. I think that when you talk about current here, that I think one of the good things about the conference has been that the people who are looking at a cross-section of cross-strait relations are all of the presentations have been historically informed, as nobody assumes that current cross-strait relations do not have a historical background to them, and that they've all done a very good job of trying to show how things have evolved to a current situation. We've seen the papers have illustrated the changes in the players, the changes in the backgrounds of the players, and of the interests of the people who are involved in this process.